move to a special address. Sri B. Ashok is a distinguished industry leader who has served as chairman of Indian Oil Corporation Limited and has played a pivotal role in strengthening India's energy sector through transformative leadership and strategic vision. May I invite Sri B. Ashok to deliver the special address.
Mr. B. Ashok, former chairman of Indian Oil Corporation Limited and Chennai Petroleum Corporation Limited, is a distinguished energy sector leader with over 3 decades of experience in the oil and gas industry. A mechanical engineer from College of Engineering, Delhi, with a management qualification from India, Mr. Ashok has had key leadership roles across retail, overseas operations, and corporate strategy. Mr. Ashok is widely respected for his contributions to India's retail transformation, global operations, and downstream energy sector thought leadership.
Thank you very much, MMA, Mr. Shankar, CPCL, for inviting me to be part of this wonderful evening. It was really exhilarating to listen to Dr. Anantha Nageswaran and, of course, Professor Ashwin. And to be following that would be tough. But the subject is very close to my heart, and it was really brilliant to listen to these people who probably are not truly from public sector, even though I came to know that Dr. Anantha Nageswaran started his tenure with CPCL. It's very nice to know that. And though he has that the public sector feel within him, it's nice to hear from outsiders good words about public sector, because normally I say that, having led and spent a lot of my career in Indian Oil, I used to say, Indian Oil is like an administration department. When things go wrong, only people will notice you. When things go right, nobody even notices you. So that's the normal position. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me again. Mr. Shankar, Group Captain Vijay Kumar, and colleagues from CPCL, my erstwhile colleagues, and the directors, and Mr. Ramalingam. Nice to see you and to be here. It's indeed an honor to have been invited for this endowment lecture and also recall the memories of late Sri Deenadayalu, a doyen amongst the industrial leaders in Tamil Nadu, and whose contributions to the development of the petroleum and petrochemical cluster in Manali and the state have been immense. We could not have gathered at a more challenging time than now for these discussions, as the global events since February 28th have totally shaken our pretensions about how the world is expected to operate. Modern conflicts are no longer confined to territorial borders. They disrupt global supply chains, fracture energy networks, and destabilize entire economies. Their impact extends far beyond immediate human costs, altering infrastructure and long-term growth. Having spent my entire career in the oil and gas sector, issues like climate change, air pollution, emissions, besides the primary job of easing energy access for consumers, have been at the forefront of our business for a very long time. My talk on public sector leadership may seem a little skewed in the flavor and favor of the sector. So I seek your indulgence and understanding. Though I know a lot of CPCL people are here, but for the rest of the people who are MMA members and who are not used to public sector, please seek your understanding that I'm talking too much about the public sector, more particularly about the oil and gas sector. The topic is about public sector leadership in action, driving transformation, innovation, and national growth. So talking about driving transformation, the ongoing energy transition is one of the greatest transformations the world has ever seen. However, geopolitical conflicts around the globe are currently threatening to nullify much of the progress we have worked hard to achieve. For the better part of the last 7 decades, the global energy economy has been built on the quiet assumption that the Hormuz Strait, which Professor Nageshwaran also mentioned, would remain open. On the morning of 20th February this year, that assumption ceased to hold. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, a thin channel of water separating the southern coast of Iran from the Musandam Peninsula of Oman. Through it passes roughly 20 million barrels of crude oil, which is about 4 times what India consumes, or equivalent along with a fifth of the world's traded liquefied natural gas every day. The ongoing conflict has brought marine traffic through the strait to a near halt. By any historical benchmark, the disruption has been unprecedented. The Arab oil embargo in 1973 lasted 5 months, but did not close the strait. The tanker war of Iran-Iraq conflict between 1980 and 88 reduced but did not stop traffic. The drone strikes on Saudi upcake facility in 2019 cut output for a fortnight before recovery began. In each previous instance, the duration of supply shock was measured in weeks. The current crisis, however, has run for over 3.5 months and seems a crisis without a closure. Hopefully, there should be some closure with today's announcement, but let's see. Though at first it was not thought to be so. Even if we believe, as we often say, that this shall also pass, it's quite difficult to comprehend the length of the impact in the global energy landscape. Even if it stops as of today, the length of the impact is going to be very, very long. For India, the exposure has been acute. Almost 40% of the crude, 90% of LPG and LNG transits the strait. Whatever the geopolitical interpretation of the day, that means we may support this way or that way, the operational reality was unambiguous. The single largest artery of energy supply to the world's third largest energy consumer, that is India, has ceased to function. Iranian authorities have intermittently extended bilateral safe passage arrangements, but this has been erratic, and of late we have even seen death of Indian sailors. The crisis has once again brought to focus the oil and gas public sector leadership in action, their impact and influence, although in typical style behind the scenes. It is quite ironical that this sector has always been tested for its crisis management skills quite frequently. Recent memories of COVID, when supplies of LPG had to be sustained despite lockdown, or when refineries were asked to support oxygen supplies to hospitals, the multiple natural disasters across the country. I mean, many of you may remember even the Chennai floods, or times of conflicts, whether it was Operation Sindoor or the present Mid East crisis. So the oil industry has always faced these crises and continued to do their job so that the Aam Aadmi or the common consumer is not put to difficulty. In a global context, when you look at this, the global language for energy transition has been changing over the last year or so, even before the current Mid East crisis. While transition is still happening, the leadership is more concerned about energy security, technologies, and resilience. Economic and industrial policies are now the main drivers rather than the classical integrated energy policy. Governments now focus more on local content, job creation, trade measures, subsidies and tax credits to achieve economic and strategic goals. There is a race to build factories more than solar or wind farms. There is an understanding that no single technology will solve the energy transition and a mix of solutions are needed. Many players and governments are withdrawing from being climate champions to securing the businesses and jobs of the future, whether it is batteries, hydrogen, clean tech manufacturing, or data centers, or as the professor just mentioned, AI. Geopolitical tensions have put energy security at the top of the agenda for most energy import-dependent countries. Resilience also means economic and social stability in terms of affordable access and system resilience in the face of new threats such as climate, cyber, and supply chain disruptions. So how different is the leadership challenge in India? India's energy challenge is quite complex. It faces simultaneous scale and transformation. Most countries deal with only one. They either deal with scale or they deal with transition. In fact, most countries don't deal with the scale that India deals with. Despite the great strides in renewables and alternative energies, the core energy industry, including demand for oil and gas, is still growing in absolute numbers. It would continue in the path due to economic growth. Energy infrastructure creation remains critical for the country's progress. The push for increased strategic storage for crude, LPG, LNG is one of the many such infrastructural requirements. India has been the fastest growing large economy in the world for the last few years, yet we still face the monumental task of lifting millions out of poverty to reach a global average standard of living. To achieve that phase, we need significant economic development, which naturally requires a lot more energy. In my view, there is no single form of energy today that does not have a flip side. Consider the environmental impact of mining rare metals, powering EVs with coal-based grids, or diverting scarce land and water resources for massive solar parks and hydrogen production. Mistaken choices can have real social and economic consequences in the long run. We need a deeply balanced approach. Biofuels, biogas provide immense hope in our country. There is a massive untapped potential for distributed energy production and usage in rural India, particularly through biogas generation solar appliances. More importantly, the efficient, optimal use of energy and the deliberate development of technology to mitigate emissions are our best ways forward. So, is there a leadership paradox in this? In India, energy security, affordability, and sustainability often compete for attention. Hence, for energy leadership, it's less about choosing the ideal future and more about responsibly bridging the present to the future. The trade-offs between energy options have to be sequenced. The Indian energy leaders need to be pragmatic visionaries, ambitious but deeply grounded in realities. In the short term, energy security and affordability are non-negotiable. In the medium term, efficiency and diversification, and in the long term, decarbonization pathways. The strategic clarity makes decision choices, including capital allocation decisions, better. However, even with such clarity, the role of leadership in Indian energy sector is not an easy ride. The environment in which the leadership operates, especially the large public sector companies, is firstly close to public interest. No better example than the present when the companies are forced to sell fuels below cost to protect customers. Secondly, their decisions are constantly second-guessed. That is, after a decision is made, people tend to reevaluate, question, or criticize it, often using information or outcomes that were not available at the time the decision was taken. And thirdly, any silence creates distrust. Hence, strong leaderships explain these trade-offs transparently rather than pretending that conflicts do not exist. It is difficult to have perfect answers, but being honest about priorities and timelines helps. The challenge for Indian energy leadership is to push organizations decisively towards renewables, biofuels, and alternatives without destabilizing core oil and gas operations that remain critical. Transition must be additive rather than substitutive. Core oil and gas business not only generates the revenues, it also pays the bills. Ask any of the state governments where from they are getting their revenues. They will say it is because of taxation of fuels. Transition business, on the other hand, needs patience and protection, probably a lot of subsidies as well. So mixing these up can be dangerous. Energy security and reliability, affordability and economic growth, sustainability and transition are all important. The challenge of the leadership is not about choosing amongst them. It is about keeping all of them moving by calibrating the pace differently through their decisions. The leadership is also about the nature of the industry. Large Indian energy companies are asset heavy. Most projects are also high investment, have long gestations. These companies, especially the PSUs, are perceived as very risk conscious or even risk aversive. So how does the leadership unlock innovation and change in these organizations? There is definitely no shortage of talent or ideas in these organizations, as the professor also remarked. What they are short of is really the psychological safety. Innovation struggles not because people don't know what to do, but because they are afraid of the consequences of trying. In asset-heavy, safety-critical businesses, risk aversion is understandable. But leadership should make a distinction between operational risks, which must be tightly controlled, and innovation risk, which must be encouraged. When leaders are not able to establish a clear distinction, the organizations become more conservative. Innovation fails not because of lack of ideas, but it fails because of fear. Removal of fear by leadership hence best encourages innovation. So what should be the capabilities of India's next energy leaders? While the scenario is also already changing, the next generation of energy leaders in India will face a very different landscape from their predecessors. They will not be managing steady-state businesses or assets alone. They will have to manage transitions, contradictions, and heightened expectations. Some critical capabilities are: number one, systems thinking. Energy decisions sit at the intersections of policy, geopolitics, technology, finance, environment, and society. Leaders who optimize one dimension will struggle to lead. The ability to see second order and third order consequences will be critical. A 360-degree and a global view, and the ability to connect the dots and read patterns intuitively beyond just data would be very important. The second is the stakeholder empathy. This would become a core skill. The ability to engage with government, investors, employees, communities, and the public, often with competing expectations. Leadership will be less about command and more about persuasion, influence, and achieving alignment. The third one is about personal resilience and strength of a leader. The pace of change, public scrutiny, and ambiguity can be quite exhausting for a leader. Leaders need to stay grounded, ready to make decisions with incomplete information, and remain balanced when there are no perfect answers. The challenge of attracting and retaining talent in an era when the relevance of the industry is questioned is another challenge. This indeed is a very real concern, and leaders should not be dismissive about it. More so when one considers the strategic and critical nature of the industry. While in India, getting the quantity in terms of numbers is not currently an issue, quality is. Even though the professor had good words for the tier 2 and tier 3 colleges and their orientation, the young students, but quality in larger quantity is definitely an issue. The bigger threat is also about retaining the talent, as most organizations would acknowledge. Younger professionals today are asking deeper questions, not just about what they do, but why they do. Leaders and organizations should see this not as a threat, but as a signal for them to evolve. It is necessary to position the industry honestly. Leaders need to acknowledge that oil and gas will remain critical for India's growth and energy security today, even as the industry takes the responsibility for transitioning to a low-carbon future. Talent is more likely to be attached by purpose and relevance rather than labels. It's not in which company do I serve or so, but whether the job that they are doing is really of relevance. When young professionals see themselves as contributing to nation-building priorities, whether it's affordable energy, reliability, and a responsible transition, they engage more meaningfully. We have any number of examples from the recent past about what such purposiveness can do in terms of motivation and on-ground delivery excellence. The PM Ujjwala Yojana, for example, which has brought about a social transformation by providing access to clean energy, that is LPG, to cover over 100 million underprivileged families, including far-flung tribal hamlets, in record time, is a striking example. It was based on an outstanding on-ground delivery model that was driven by purposiveness, motivated executives, and a clear direction from above. Similar is the engagement during natural calamities or other crises. We always wonder what really makes people, even risk their lives when things are pushed to a crisis. I mean, because they see the sense of purposiveness, that's why they do it. I mean, CPCL was a typical example. At least a few years back, a couple of cyclones directly hit the refinery. I don't remember the name. I think what was the, huh? Yeah, okay. So I remember one of our colleagues had to climb a huge tower and then close a valve so that the refinery doesn't have a safety incident. And even in that wind speed of nearly 100 kilometers, people were prepared to risk their lives and climb up. So that is what makes jobs with purposiveness that very different. Retention, however, depends on their experience. Young people stay when they see learning, mobility, and voice in the organization. They want exposure across traditional hydrocarbons, renewables, biofuels, new technologies, etc., and not be boxed into legacy silos. Leaders should create a career pathway that reflects future energy ecosystem, not just the past structure. Culture also matters as much as strategy. If organizations remain hierarchical, slow, and intolerant of questioning, young talent is bound to disengage regardless of compensation. Leaders must make curiosity, dialogue, and experimentation safe, especially in technically conservative environments. In fact, some of us have flowered in our organizations precisely due to the freedom to try out that even the environment of the 70s and 80s provided. Unfortunately, too much of structuring the jobs, if I dare say, in the name of technology, has been a block to the creative instincts of those who want to try. Attracting and retaining talent in oil and gas is not about convincing the next generation to think like their predecessors. It is about creating an industry and leadership mindset worth believing in. When leaders demonstrate credibility, openness, and commitment, talent follows. The next generation will not join oil and gas sector for what it was, but for what it will become. Sharing experiences in developing leadership capabilities is something I want to do. The ability to think through second and third order consequences does not arise from intelligence alone. It is built over time and a combination of exposure, deliberate training, timely role placement, self-development, discipline, and humility. It would be a mistake for organizations to assume that such capabilities which naturally emerge with seniority. They must be consciously and systematically developed. I mean, it's not necessary that this is valid only for the public sector. It is equally valid for the private sector. Today, we find people who are excellent in their own silos, but who actually lack the organizational leadership capability. The need is even more pronounced in public sector, particularly in energy domain, where organizations are strategically critical and operate at an enormous scale with decisions that have far-reaching economic, social, and geopolitical consequences. Drawing from my own experience, both while progressing through the ranks of a PSU and later while being involved in the selection of senior leadership, I would like to share a few reflections. The first is the debate between functional depth versus enterprise perspective. There is a persistent debate between functional expertise and rounded exposure. High potential leadership talent must be pushed out of functional silos in their early careers. When individuals spend decades in one or two domains within a large organization, they tend to optimize locally while missing systemic impacts. I'm not saying the domain expertise is not required, no? But there are some people who need to become organizational leaders. There are many people who would like to be functional leaders, but there are some people who would have to be organizational leaders. I'm only saying or making a case that where an organization identifies the potential of a person to be an organizational leader, his or her pathway needs to be different. So high potential leadership talent must be pushed out of functional silos early in their careers. When individuals spend decades in one or two domains within a large organization, they tend to optimize locally while missing systemic impacts. This is often why highly experienced executives perform well in functional leadership roles, but fall short in enterprise leadership. While not every talented executive aspires to lead an enterprise, it is the organization's responsibility to identify those with such potential early and provide them with the right opportunities. The second thing is a deliberate investment in learning and exposure. Identified high potential talent must receive structured learning inputs over time. including participation in external programs, conferences like this. These experiences broaden perspectives and help build networks beyond the organization. Unfortunately, during cost optimization drives, such investments are often the first to be cut, despite their long-term impact. At the same time, individuals also must proactively seek visibility through presentations and speaking opportunities and external engagement. Exposure to diverse leadership roles is another important thing. Large organizations offer multiple leadership positions, and potential leaders should be deliberately rotated and through them to assess readiness and build capacity. This exposure develops real business judgment. A healthy balance between line and staff roles is essential to gain both implementation depth and policy perspective. Too often, executives reach senior positions having operated only in one track, resulting in gaps in either ground-level appreciation or strategic understanding. There's also a need for revitalizing mentorship. Historically, PSUs benefited from strong informal mentoring by senior leaders. Today, however, speed, technology, and workload pressures have reduced the time leaders devote to develop others. Yet the presence of the right mentor, someone who serves as a sounding board and offers perspective, is invaluable. I'm sure a lot of the old people will remember their old bosses because the bosses were willing to spend time, energy, and effort with them. But today, many of the leaders should think for themselves whether they are having the time to spend with their subordinates. I think the answer is a clear no. So this is something which organizations have to, I'm saying that everybody becomes very busy doing the things that they should be doing irrespective of their levels. So while mentorship is a global best practice, it remains very underutilized in PSUs. And then I'm also a firm believer in growing leaders from within. In my experience, developing top leadership internally is particularly effective in large PSUs. By design, these roles have limited tenures because it takes time for people to climb up the ladder. Often, external appointees often spend a significant portion of their time trying to understand the organization, the complexities, its people, leaving little time to create impact. Conversely, excessively long tenures at the top can also be counterproductive as they block succession, dampen motivation, and push capable talent to seek opportunities elsewhere. Finally, leaders must develop personal humility. The willingness to say, I may be wrong, is often the gateway to deeper thinking. Leaders who surround themselves only with agreement risk seeing no further than the first order outcomes. Top leadership should also recognize the responsibility of developing the next generation of leaders. I'm sorry, it seems to be a lecture in leadership, but these are actually practical problems that at least I have seen in my career. So I thought it was a good forum for me to share some of these points. So in conclusion, we began by looking at how fragile our assumptions of the world can be. A narrow waterway has demonstrated the deep interconnect between energy, security, economics, and society. The PSU leadership, which is in the midst of managing this crisis quite literally in the hot seat, hence needs to be seen with a lens not merely by operational performance or financial outcomes, though both are absolutely critical for the very survival of the industry. However, a more holistic measure of the current leadership is in their ability to navigate uncertainty, balance competing priorities, and take decisions whose consequences may unfold much later. Leadership quality will be defined by the quality of judgment exercised in the conditions of scale, complexity, scrutiny, and constraint. India's energy journey is unique. Unlike many developed economies, our challenge is not simply transition. It is transformation while continuing to grow, industrialize, and improve the quality of life of millions. That really demands neither ideological choices nor technological dogma, but a pragmatic leadership anchored in national priorities. The question before us is not whether the future of energy will be different. It certainly will be. The real question is whether we build the leadership capability required to shape that future rather than merely react to it. The future will undoubtedly bring new technologies, new disruptions, and new uncertainties. While technology can achieve marvelous outcomes, it will always struggle to displace the depth of human capability, ethical judgment, deep creativity, and intuition. As we move forward, the real differentiator will be the ability to build institutions that learn, leaders who think beyond first-order outcomes, and cultures where innovation is protected than feared. If we can translate insight into disciplined, credible action, India will not only meet its energy needs, but define a transition pathway that is uniquely its own, responsible, resilient, and inclusive. This would in turn be a critical contributor towards driving transformation, innovation, and national growth. Thank you very much for your patient listening.